The morning sky above Colorado Springs turned dark with ships that had no business being there. Jake Morrison stood at the window of his office at the Space Force base and watched something impossible happen in real time. Massive vessels blocked out the sun like storm clouds made of metal and strange glowing lights. He had spent 15 years preparing for threats from space, but nothing in his training covered this. Jake grabbed his radio and called the command center. The voice that came back sounded shaky and scared. "Sir, we have multiple contacts approaching all major cities worldwide. They appeared out of nowhere about 10 minutes ago." Jake ran toward the command room while fighter jets screamed overhead. The jets looked like toys compared to the alien ships hanging in the sky. President Lisa Martinez sat in the White House Situation Room, watching feeds from around the world. New York, London, Tokyo, Moscow, and dozens of other cities all showed the same thing. Giant ships hovering over population centers, while smaller craft moved between them like busy worker bees. Her military advisors spoke in urgent whispers about response options, but everyone knew the truth. Earth had been caught completely off guard. Admiral Cathvar stood on the bridge of his flagship and reviewed the tactical display with satisfaction. The third planet of this system had fallen under Zephyrian control in less than 4 hours. His fleet had surrounded the world and disabled their primitive defense networks without losing a single ship. The inhabitants called their world Earth and themselves humans. Both names would soon be footnotes in the Empire's expansion records. The humans had tried to fight back, of course. Their flying machines had launched missiles and energy weapons at his ships, but the attacks simply bounced off Zephyrian shields, like raindrops on metal. A few demonstration strikes on empty military bases had ended all organized resistance. Now the leaders of various human governments were sending surrender messages on every frequency they could find. Dr. Vex Thule walked through the captured human research facility in Nevada and made notes on his datapad. The creatures were smaller than most sentient species the Empire had encountered, but they showed signs of intelligence. Their technology was crude but functional. Most interesting was their apparent diversity. Unlike most civilized worlds where evolution had produced a single dominant form, these humans came in many different appearances and seemed to organize themselves into competing groups. The xenobiologist paused at a display showing human military equipment. Projectile weapons, chemical explosives, and primitive armor systems filled the cases. Such crude tools for warfare suggested a species that had not yet learned the benefits of peaceful expansion. The Empire would teach them better ways, of course. All conquered species eventually learned to appreciate Zephyrian guidance. Katie Hughes watched alien soldiers march through downtown Denver from her apartment window. The creatures walked on 2 legs like humans, but stood nearly 8 feet tall, with thick gray skin and forearms. They carried weapons that hummed with energy and moved with the confidence of a force that had never known defeat. Katie had served 3 tours in Afghanistan before becoming a police officer. She recognized the look of occupying forces when she saw it. The aliens had made their intentions clear through translated broadcasts. Earth was now part of the Zephyrian Empire. Human governments would be dissolved and replaced with imperial administration. All military forces would surrender their weapons. Anyone who cooperated would be treated well. Anyone who resisted would be eliminated. Simple and direct, just like every conquest in human history. Frank Collins sat in his laboratory at NASA and stared at the alien device his new supervisors had given him to study. The technology was beyond anything humans had developed, but the basic principles seemed familiar. Energy storage, data processing, communication systems. Different methods, but same goals. Frank had spent 20 years designing spacecraft systems and knew that all technology had weaknesses. Even alien technology. The Zephyrian occupation forces moved efficiently through major population centers. They established control points in government buildings, set up communication networks, and began cataloging human resources. Their computers estimated that full integration of Earth into the Empire would take approximately 2 years. Standard procedure for a Class 7 civilization. What the computers could not calculate was something that would not show up in any database. The humans had surrendered too quickly and too completely. Species that developed spaceflight usually fought harder when invaded. They called for help from allies or attempted desperate last stands that cost the Empire ships and soldiers. Earth had given up after less than a day of fighting. That should have been the first warning sign. Jake Morrison sat in a detention center with other captured military officers and listened to the aliens explain their new reality. A translator device allowed him to understand the Zephyrian commander, who spoke about cooperation and peaceful integration. Jake nodded and smiled and gave all the right answers. Inside his head, he was already planning. The aliens thought they had won a war, but Jake knew better. They had only won the first battle. The real war had not even started yet. 3 months had passed since the surrender and regional governor. Nell Seath was beginning to understand why his predecessors had warned about primitive worlds. The humans seemed eager to please and quick to follow orders, but small problems kept appearing everywhere. Supply convoys would arrive late because of mechanical failures. Communication equipment would malfunction at inconvenient times. Work crews would make simple mistakes that required days to fix. Katie Hughes smiled warmly at the Zephyrian supervisor who had just assigned her to coordinate human work teams in the Denver region. She thanked him for the opportunity and promised to ensure maximum efficiency from the local population. The alien seemed pleased with her attitude and dismissed her with what might have been approval. Katie walked to her new office and immediately began memorizing the patrol schedules she had seen on his desk. The former Marine had spent weeks learning how to appear helpful while gathering intelligence. She asked innocent questions about Zephyrian culture and listened carefully to answers about their home world, their military structure, and their expansion methods. Every conversation taught her something new about the enemy. Every smile hid another piece of information that might prove useful later. Frank Collins had been assigned to maintain communication networks under alien supervision. His Zephyrian overseer, Dr. Thekmal, seemed to believe that humans were naturally incompetent with complex technology. Frank encouraged this belief by making small errors that looked like primitive thinking, but actually created backdoors in the alien systems. Each mistake opened another pathway that could be exploited when the time came. The NASA engineer had always been good at solving problems, but working under occupation had taught him new skills. He learned to hide intelligence behind apparent confusion. He discovered how to make sabotage look like accident. Most importantly, he figured out how to use alien overconfidence against them. The Zephyrians expected humans to be inferior, so Frank gave them exactly what they expected to see. Danny Rodriguez moved through the shadows of occupied Los Angeles like a ghost. The former CIA operative had gone underground the day the aliens arrived and spent 3 months building networks that the occupying forces could not detect. His teams included everyone from gang members who knew the city streets to tech workers who understood computer systems. The aliens controlled the surface, but humans owned the underground. Every night, Danny's people gathered information about alien patrol routes, supply schedules, and communication protocols. They mapped weak points in the occupation force and identified targets for future operations. The Zephyrians thought they were watching a defeated population, but they were actually being studied by experts who had spent decades learning how to operate in hostile territory. Amy Patterson stood in her corporate boardroom and listened to Zephyrian economic planners explain how Earth's resources would be integrated into the imperial economy. The tech billionaire nodded at appropriate moments and asked reasonable questions about production quotas and distribution systems. She never mentioned that her humanitarian aid programs had been secretly moving weapons equipment and personnel since the first week of occupation. The aliens seemed impressed by human business efficiency and had decided to work with existing corporate structures rather than replacing them entirely. This decision gave Amy and other business leaders opportunities that military resistance could never provide. Money and resources could be moved through channels that looked legitimate to alien auditors, but actually funded growing resistance operations. Pete Johnson worked on alien vehicles in his garage in small-town Kansas and listened to Zephyrian soldiers complain about the local climate and food. The mechanic had always been good with his hands, but occupation had taught him new ways to use those skills. Every repair job gave him chances to study alien technology, and every conversation with soldiers revealed details about their capabilities and weaknesses. Pete's shop had become an unofficial meeting place for resistance members who posed as customers. Farmers brought intelligence from rural areas. Truck drivers shared information about supply routes. Former soldiers discussed tactical possibilities. The aliens saw a simple repair shop, but humans saw something much more important. They saw proof that resistance was possible, even in the smallest communities. Dr. Vex Thul reviewed his reports on human behavior and noted several concerning patterns. The creatures adapted to occupation faster than expected and showed unusual cooperation between different groups that had previously been in conflict. Religious, political, and cultural divisions that should have made them easier to control seemed to disappear when faced with external threats. This was not typical behavior for newly conquered species. The xenobiologist had expected months of civil unrest as different human factions blamed each other for the invasion. Instead, he observed increasing unity and coordination. Former enemies worked together on reconstruction projects. Competing governments shared resources without argument. Military personnel, who should have been bitter about defeat, seemed surprisingly calm and focused. Something was happening that did not fit standard conquest models. Jake Morrison sat in a coffee shop in Colorado Springs and pretended to read a newspaper while actually observing alien patrol patterns. 3 months of detention had taught him valuable lessons about Zephyrian security procedures. They were efficient but predictable. They followed standard protocols without adapting to local conditions. Most importantly, they underestimated human intelligence and assumed that cooperation meant acceptance. The former Space Force officer had been released after proving his willingness to work with the new government. His official job involved helping aliens understand human infrastructure, but his real work happened during off hours. Jake used his military contacts to coordinate resistance activities across the country. The network grew stronger every day while the aliens remained convinced that Earth was fully under their control. 6 months after the conquest, Danny Rodriguez emerged from the shadows of Los Angeles with news that would change everything. The former CIA operative had spent half a year building networks and gathering intelligence. Now he was ready to coordinate with resistance cells that had grown up in every major city on Earth. The aliens thought they were governing a defeated planet, but they were actually sitting on top of the largest underground movement in human history. Danny met with cell leaders in abandoned subway tunnels beneath New York City. Katie Hughes had traveled from Denver with detailed information about alien patrol schedules and security protocols. Frank Collins brought technical data about Zephyrian communication systems and power grids. Amy Patterson had funding and resources hidden in accounts that alien auditors could never trace. Each person represented thousands of others who were ready to fight back. The resistance had learned to use human diversity as a weapon against the occupying forces. The Zephyrians had expected to deal with a single unified government, but instead faced dozens of different groups that organized in ways aliens could not understand. Urban gangs provided muscle and street knowledge. Rural farmers offered hiding places and supply routes. Corporate executives moved money and equipment. Military veterans trained civilians in combat techniques. Pete Johnson's garage in Kansas had become a major hub for underground communications. The mechanic had figured out how to modify alien communication devices to create secure channels that connected resistance cells across the continent. His network carried messages between cities and coordinated operations that the Zephyrians could not detect. What looked like routine repair work was actually the backbone of a growing rebellion. Amy Patterson sat in her corporate headquarters and reviewed financial reports that told a story very different from what alien administrators believed. Her humanitarian aid programs had moved millions of dollars to resistance operations while maintaining perfect cover as legitimate charity work. Food shipments contained weapons. Medical supplies included communication equipment. Educational programs trained people in sabotage techniques. The tech billionaire had discovered that Zephyrian economic systems were remarkably similar to human models. The aliens understood profit and efficiency, but they missed the subtle ways that money could be redirected and resources could disappear. Amy used their own bureaucracy against them while building the financial foundation for a war they did not see coming. Frank Collins made a breakthrough that changed the entire nature of the resistance. The NASA engineer had been studying captured alien technology for months and finally understood how their systems integrated with Earth's infrastructure. The Zephyrians had not replaced human networks, but had instead connected their own systems to existing communications and power grids. This decision gave Frank access to alien technology through pathways they did not even know existed. Working with computer experts from around the world, Frank began creating hybrid systems that combined human and alien technology in ways that neither species had imagined. The Resistance could now monitor Zephyrian communications, intercept their orders, and even take control of their equipment. The aliens had given humans the keys to their own technology without realizing it. Dr. Vex Thu filed increasingly worried reports about human behavior patterns. The species was not responding to occupation in ways that Imperial scientists had predicted. Instead of breaking down under pressure, they were becoming more organized and efficient. Different human groups that had been enemies before the invasion were now working together toward common goals. This level of cooperation was unprecedented in Zephyrian experience. The xenobiologist had begun studying human military history and discovered troubling information. These creatures had been fighting wars against each other for thousands of years. They had developed tactics and strategies that the Empire had never encountered. Most disturbing was their apparent ability to learn from defeat and use enemy advantages against them. Earth was not behaving like a conquered world, but like a military academy preparing for graduation. Jake Morrison stood in a warehouse outside Denver and watched former enemies work side by side, preparing for operations that would have been impossible 6 months earlier. Army Rangers shared techniques with gang members. Navy SEALs taught urban warfare to farmers. Air Force pilots trained truck drivers to coordinate complex logistics. The alien invasion had done something that no human leader had ever accomplished. It had united Earth's warriors under a single banner. The former Space Force officer had been quietly building a command structure that combined the best of every military tradition on Earth. Chinese strategists worked with Russian tacticians. Israeli intelligence specialists coordinated with British commandos. American special forces shared methods with guerrilla fighters from every continent. The resistance was becoming something that had never existed before, a truly global military. Force. Regional Governor Nal Seth received reports that made no sense according to imperial doctrine. Human productivity was increasing instead of decreasing. Infrastructure repairs were happening faster than expected. Population centers were showing signs of improved organization rather than the chaos that usually followed conquest. Either his administrators were filing false reports or something unprecedented was happening on Earth. The governor had conquered 12 worlds during his career and knew the standard patterns of occupation. Resistance movements were supposed to be small, desperate groups that slowly lost support as populations accepted imperial rule. On Earth, the opposite seemed to be happening. More humans were joining resistance activities rather than fewer. Equipment was disappearing at faster rates rather than slower. Most puzzling of all, the humans seemed to be getting better at hiding their activities rather than worse. Danny Rodriguez met with resistance leaders from around the world through encrypted communications that the aliens could not intercept. Every report brought the same message. Humans were ready to move from passive resistance to active warfare. 6 months of preparation had created the foundation for operations that would shock the occupying forces. The underground was ready to surface, and the surface was ready to fight back. The former CIA operative looked at maps, showing resistance cells in every major city and supply routes connecting rural hiding places across continents. Weapons caches were positioned near strategic targets. Communication networks linked every operation center. Training had turned millions of civilians into potential soldiers. Earth was no longer an occupied planet. It was a loaded weapon waiting for someone to pull the trigger. Admiral Kethvar stood before tactical displays that showed a situation he had never encountered in 30 years of military service. 1 year after the conquest of Earth, his forces were somehow losing control despite maintaining overwhelming technological superiority. Supply lines suffered constant disruption. Communication networks experienced daily failures. Critical infrastructure required continuous repair. Most disturbing of all, his troops reported being watched by enemies they could never locate or capture. The admiral had commanded successful occupations of 17 different worlds. Each conquest had followed predictable patterns. Initial resistance would collapse within weeks. Collaboration governments would maintain order while populations adapted to imperial rule. Resource extraction would begin within 6 months. Full integration usually took less than 2 years. Earth was different. Earth was wrong. Dr. Vexthul entered the Admiral's command center, carrying data files that contained the most disturbing discovery of his scientific career. The xenobiologist had spent months analyzing human historical records and found information that changed everything he thought he knew about this species. These creatures had not evolved on a peaceful world where intelligence led to cooperation. They had developed on a planet where survival required constant warfare against their own kind. The scientist activated holographic displays, showing human military history spanning thousands of years. Every technological advancement had come from conflict. Every social structure had been shaped by competition. Every aspect of their civilization reflected the need to overcome enemies who possessed equal intelligence and determination. Earth had not produced farmers or philosophers as its dominant species. It had created warriors. Rick Barnes crouched in the forests of Washington State and watched a Zephyrian patrol walk into a trap that had been planned with precision learned from hunting other humans. The former Navy SEAL had spent 6 months studying alien movement patterns and tactical responses. Now he was ready to demonstrate why human military experience was more valuable than advanced technology. His team carried weapons made from captured alien components, but they fought with strategies developed over centuries of human conflict. The ambush lasted less than 5 minutes. Zephyrian soldiers found themselves surrounded by enemies who moved through terrain like they had been born there. Advanced sensors detected no threats until projectiles began striking from impossible angles. Energy shields deflected most attacks. But humans had learned to target weak points that alien engineers never considered. The entire patrol was captured without firing a single shot in return. Frank Collins sat in his laboratory and studied communication intercepts that revealed the growing panic among Zephyrian command staff. The aliens were reporting equipment failures that made no technical sense. Systems would function perfectly during inspections, but malfunction during critical operations. Security protocols would work normally until someone tried to use them against human infiltrators. The occupying forces were discovering that their technology had been compromised from the inside. The NASA engineer had spent a year learning alien systems better than most Zephyrians understood them. Every repair job had been an opportunity to plant subtle modifications. Every software update had included hidden subroutines. Every new installation had contained backdoors that looked like design flaws. The aliens had trusted human technical assistance, and now their own equipment was working against them. Katie Hughes walked through downtown Denver and observed alien soldiers who looked increasingly nervous and isolated. The former Marine had been promoted to regional coordinator, which gave her access to detailed information about occupation force morale and capabilities. What she saw was an army that had lost confidence in its mission. Zephyrian troops no longer patrolled in small groups. They avoided certain neighborhoods entirely. They jumped at unexpected sounds and treated every human interaction as a potential threat. The resistance had learned to use psychological warfare techniques that were invisible to alien commanders, but devastatingly effective against their soldiers. Graffiti appeared overnight in places that should have been impossible to reach. Strange sounds echoed through empty buildings. Equipment disappeared from secure locations. The humans were not attacking directly, but they were making it clear that they could strike anywhere at any time. The occupying forces were beginning to feel like prey instead of predators. Amy Patterson reviewed financial reports that showed how completely the resistance had penetrated Zephyrian administrative systems. The tech billionaire had used her corporate resources to create an economic intelligence network that monitored every aspect of the occupation. She knew which alien officials were corrupt and could be bribed. She understood which supply contracts were vulnerable to disruption. Most importantly, she had learned how to make the conquest cost more than the Empire could afford. The aliens had expected Earth to generate profits that would fund expansion to other worlds. Instead, they were spending resources at unsustainable rates just to maintain basic control. Equipment replacement costs were 10 times higher than projected. Security operations required constant reinforcement. Administrative overhead grew every month rather than decreasing. Earth was becoming a financial disaster that threatened other Imperial operations. Dr. Vexthal presented his final analysis to Admiral Kethvar and watched the military commander's expression change from confidence to something approaching fear. The xenobiologist had discovered that humans were not just another conquered species. They were something that had never appeared in the galaxy before. A civilization that had perfected warfare against opponents who possessed equal intelligence, creativity, and determination. Every other species the Empire had encountered had evolved under conditions that favored cooperation over conflict. Intelligence had developed as a tool for building peaceful societies and exploring the universe. Humans had used their intelligence for something entirely different. They had created the most sophisticated military culture in known space. Earth was not a world full of farmers and craftsmen. It was a planet populated by soldiers who had been training their entire lives for exactly this situation. Regional Governor Nalseth filed reports that would reshape imperial expansion policies for the next century. Earth had taught the Zephyrian Empire a lesson that no other conquest had provided. Technological superiority was not enough to guarantee victory against enemies who understood warfare better than the attackers did. Some species could not be conquered using standard methods, because they had spent millennia learning how to fight. Conquests exactly like this one. The governor had realized something that chilled him to his core. The humans had not been surprised by invasion because they had been preparing for it without knowing it. Every war they fought against each other had been practice for the day when external enemies would arrive. Earth had been conquered by an empire that specialized in overwhelming primitive civilizations. But Earth specialized in something much more dangerous. Earth specialized in defeating enemies who thought they were superior. 18 months after the invasion, Jake Morrison stood in a command center that had been built inside an abandoned mine shaft in Colorado and watched displays showing resistance operations across 6 continents. The former Space Force officer had been chosen to coordinate Operation Homecoming, the largest military effort in human history. Every lesson learned from 18 months of occupation would be applied in a campaign designed to drive the aliens from Earth permanently. The operation began at dawn with simultaneous strikes against Zephyrian installations in 200 cities worldwide. Human forces used captured alien technology combined with tactics developed through centuries of warfare against equally intelligent opponents. The attacks were not random acts of sabotage, but carefully coordinated military operations that targeted specific weaknesses in the occupation infrastructure. Maria Santos led the assault on Zephyrian command centers in the American Southwest. The former Army colonel had spent months studying alien defensive systems and identified vulnerabilities that the occupying forces never suspected. Her teams moved through urban environments like water flowing around obstacles, while alien defenders struggled to track enemies who seemed to vanish and reappear at will. The resistance fighters used techniques that blended ancient guerrilla warfare with cutting-edge technology stolen from their enemies. They moved through subway tunnels and sewer systems that aliens could not navigate. They communicated using frequencies that Zephyrian equipment could not intercept. They struck from positions that sensors could not detect, then disappeared before reinforcements could arrive. Ben Walsh coordinated cyber warfare operations from a hidden facility beneath Seattle. The tech entrepreneur had assembled a team of programmers and engineers who understood both human and alien computer systems. Their attacks were not crude attempts to break alien codes, but sophisticated operations that turned Zephyrian technology against itself. The cyber teams had spent months mapping alien networks and identifying critical nodes that could be compromised. Now they activated viruses that had been planted during the occupation period. Zephyrian communications began carrying false orders. Supply databases showed incorrect inventory levels. Security systems started reporting threats that did not exist while ignoring real attacks. The aliens discovered that their own computers had become their greatest enemy. Danny Rodriguez emerged from 18 months underground to coordinate intelligence operations that gave human forces advantages the aliens could not counter. The former CIA operative had built spy networks that penetrated every level of the Zephyrian command structure. His agents knew alien patrol schedules, defensive positions, and strategic plans, sometimes before enemy commanders received their orders. Intelligence networks used methods that the Empire had never encountered. Human agents posed as maintenance workers who overheard classified conversations. Resistance members in administrative positions copied secret documents. Technical specialists planted listening devices that looked like standard equipment. The Zephyrians found themselves fighting an enemy that seemed to know their plans before they made them. Rick Barnes led special operations teams that demonstrated why human military experience was worth more than advanced technology. The former Navy SEAL had trained civilian volunteers in combat techniques that combined traditional warfare with alien equipment. His soldiers moved like ghosts through enemy territory and struck with precision that Zephyrian forces could not match. The special operations teams targeted high-value objectives that would cripple alien capabilities. They destroyed communication relays that coordinated occupation forces across entire regions. They captured supply depots that contained enough equipment to arm thousands of resistance fighters. They eliminated key personnel whose loss created confusion and panic in the enemy command structure. Every mission succeeded because humans understood warfare better than their technologically superior opponents. Admiral Kethvar watched his carefully planned occupation collapse in real time as human forces demonstrated capabilities that defied every assumption about primitive species. His troops reported attacks that came from impossible directions using weapons that should not have existed. Communication with outlying bases was lost as relay stations fell to enemies who struck without. Warning then vanished like smoke. The Admiral had commanded forces that conquered worlds defended by civilizations with technology equal to the Empire. Those victories had been won through superior numbers and advanced weapons. Earth was different. Earth was teaching him that technology was useless against enemies who understood combat better than the attackers did. His soldiers were fighting humans who had been preparing for this war their entire evolutionary history. Amy Patterson used her corporate resources to support military operations that would have been impossible without civilian backing. The tech billionaire had converted her business empire into a logistics network that supplied resistance forces faster than alien administrators could track. Weapons flowed through distribution channels that looked like humanitarian aid. Ammunition moved in shipments labeled as medical supplies. Communication equipment arrived disguised as educational materials. The corporate support network demonstrated something that no other conquered species had achieved. Earth's military resistance was backed by an entire civilization that understood how to support warfare operations. Every business leader, factory manager, and transportation worker had become part of a war machine that operated with efficiency the Empire could not match. Humans were not just fighting back. They were industrializing their rebellion. Frank Collins coordinated technical operations that turned Zephyrian advantages into weaknesses through methods the aliens could not comprehend. The NASA engineer had learned to use enemy technology better than its creators understood it. His teams reprogrammed alien weapons to fire on their former owners. They modified enemy vehicles to carry human assault teams deep into secure areas. They transformed Zephyrian equipment into tools for their own liberation. The technical teams represented something unprecedented in Imperial experience. Most conquered species could barely operate alien technology, even with extensive training. Humans were not just using enemy equipment, but improving it in ways that Zephyrian engineers had never considered. Earth had produced warriors who were also inventors capable of turning any weapon against its creators. Katie Hughes led urban warfare operations that demonstrated why human experience with city fighting was worth more than any technological advantage. The former Marine had grown up in an era when urban combat was the most sophisticated form of warfare on Earth. Now she was applying those skills against enemies who had never learned to fight in environments they could not control. The urban warfare teams moved through cities like they owned them, while alien forces struggled to track enemies who disappeared into populations that supported them completely. Humans fought from buildings they knew better than their opponents understood them. They used terrain features that aliens could not recognize as tactical advantages. They turned every street into a battlefield where technology mattered less than knowledge and experience. 2 years after their confident arrival, Admiral Kethvar faced a choice that no Zephyrian commander had ever confronted in the Empire's 1,000-year expansion history. He could order planetary bombardment that would destroy the world his forces had come to claim, or he could authorize withdrawal from what had become the costliest military disaster in Imperial records. His occupation force had been reduced from 50,000 troops to fewer than 20,000. Supply lines were completely compromised. Morale had collapsed to dangerous levels. The admiral stood in his command center and reviewed casualty reports that told a story of systematic defeat by enemies who should have been helpless against superior technology. Human resistance forces had captured or destroyed over 60% of Zephyrian equipment. Strategic installations that had taken months to establish were falling daily to attacks that came without warning from directions that sensors could not detect. Most disturbing of all, his intelligence officers reported that human capabilities were growing stronger rather than weaker as the conflict continued. General Claire Thompson walked through the ruins of downtown Denver and surveyed a city that had been transformed into something that no military academy in the galaxy could have predicted. The former Pentagon strategist had watched urban warfare evolve from desperate resistance to sophisticated campaign operations that outmaneuvered and technologically superior enemy through pure tactical brilliance. Every building had become a fortress. Every street corner offered firing positions. Every basement connected to tunnel networks that moved fighters faster than alien patrols could respond. The general had been chosen to represent human forces in final negotiations with the Occupation Command because her background included both military expertise and diplomatic experience. She understood that victory required more than defeating enemy armies. True success meant convincing the aliens that Earth was too dangerous to conquer and too valuable to destroy. Humans needed to demonstrate that continued occupation would cost more than any possible benefit, while showing that withdrawal could lead to mutual advantage. Dr. Vex Thol prepared reports that would change Imperial expansion doctrine for generations to come. The xenobiologist had studied human civilization for 2 years and reached conclusions that challenged everything the Empire believed about conquest and control. These creatures had not just resisted occupation. They had used the experience to become more dangerous than they had been before invasion. Earth was not producing defeated subjects, but graduates of an advanced military education program. The scientist had documented human capabilities that exceeded theoretical predictions for any known species. They demonstrated tactical flexibility that allowed rapid adaptation to changing conditions. They showed strategic thinking that operated on timescales from minutes to decades. They possessed technological creativity that turned any available materials into effective weapons. Most importantly, they displayed unity and cooperation that made their entire civilization function like a single military organism. Rick Barnes led the team that captured Admiral Kethfor's personal shuttle during a supply run to orbital facilities. The former Navy SEAL had planned the operation using intelligence gathered by resistance networks and executed with precision. That left alien escort forces unable to respond effectively. The shuttle crew surrendered without resistance after discovering that their weapons had been sabotaged and their communication systems had been compromised. The capture demonstrated capabilities that shocked the Zephyrian command structure. Human forces had operated in space using captured alien technology. They had coordinated attacks across multiple orbital platforms simultaneously. They had shown technical expertise that allowed successful boarding operations against targets designed to be impregnable. Earth's resistance had evolved from planetary guerrilla warfare to three-dimensional military operations that threatened the entire occupation fleet. Ben Walsh stood in a control room that combined human and alien technology in ways that neither species had imagined possible. The tech entrepreneur had led efforts to create hybrid systems that used Zephyrian equipment with human programming to achieve capabilities that surpassed both original designs. The Resistance now commanded communication networks that could not be intercepted. They operated sensors that could track alien movements without being detected. They controlled weapon systems that fired with accuracy that amazed enemies. Technical specialists. The hybrid technology represented something that had never appeared in Imperial experience. Most conquered species could barely operate alien equipment. Even with extensive training, Humans were not just using enemy technology, but combining it with their own innovations to create new capabilities that neither side had possessed independently. Earth had produced engineers who could turn any available resources into military advantages. Amy Patterson met with Zephyrian economic administrators and presented financial analyses that demonstrated the true cost of occupying Earth. The tech billionaire had calculated expenses that included equipment replacement, security operations, administrative overhead, and opportunity costs from delayed expansion to other worlds. The numbers showed that Earth was consuming resources faster than the Empire could replace them. Continued occupation would bankrupt imperial operations across multiple sectors. The economic warfare had been as effective as military resistance in convincing alien leadership that Earth was too expensive to control. Every month of occupation cost more than the previous month. Every destroyed facility required replacement parts that took longer to deliver. Every security upgrade needed personnel who could have been used for profitable expansion elsewhere. Earth had become a financial disaster that threatened the entire imperial economy. Frank Collins presented Admiral Kethfer with technical documentation that proved human understanding of Zephyrian technology now exceeded alien expertise in critical areas. The NASA engineer had spent 2 years studying enemy systems and developing improvements that the original designers had never considered. Human forces could now manufacture alien equipment using Earth resources. They could modify Zephyrian designs to achieve better performance than original specifications. Most significantly, they could detect and counter every defensive measure that Imperial forces possessed. The technical presentation was designed to convince alien leadership that humans had become too dangerous to fight and too valuable to waste. Earth had produced engineers and scientists who could advance Imperial technology beyond current limitations. Human military expertise could help the Empire conquer worlds that had previously been too difficult to attack. Cooperation offered benefits that continued warfare would never provide. Admiral Kethfer made the offer that would end 2 years of unprecedented military disaster. In exchange for complete withdrawal and formal recognition of Earth independence, the Empire would establish non-aggression agreements that could lead to future cooperation. Human technical expertise and military experience could be valuable to an empire that faced increasingly sophisticated resistance from other conquered worlds. Thompson considered the proposal while standing in ruins that had never fallen to alien assault. Around her, human fighters who had learned their skills fighting other humans had proven that Earth's greatest strength was not its resources or its technology. It was its people. The species that had spent millennia competing against equals had finally found opponents worthy of their abilities. The Zephyrian fleet departed 6 months later, carrying reports that would reshape Imperial expansion policies throughout the galaxy. Earth was classified as a strategic caution zone, where a species had evolved beyond standard conquest parameters. In their databases, the aliens noted that humans possessed capabilities that made them unsuitable for occupation, but potentially valuable as allies in conflicts against more dangerous enemies. As alien ships disappeared into hyperspace, Jake Morrison stood on a mountaintop in Colorado and looked up at stars that no longer seemed empty or distant. Humanity had learned they were not alone in a universe that contained both threats and opportunities. More importantly, they had discovered that the skills developed through centuries of warfare against each other had prepared them for challenges that no other species could imagine. Earth did not just mean home anymore. It meant ready for whatever came next.